In this video, we are going to look at the sugya of Sukkah Gezulah. Gemara and Daf Lamed Aleph quotes a Braisa. The Braisa says, a Sukkah Gezulah, a stolen sukkah, or a masakech Rishus Rabbim, someone who puts up a sukkah without permission in a Rishus Rabbim. We have a machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer is paisel, and the Chacham are machshirim. Rabbi Eliezer says it's not okay to use, and the Chacham say it is okay to use. Then comes Rav Nachman, and he explains that this machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is only in a case in which you force your toikeb as chavera, you throw the other guy out of a sukkah. In other words, there's a sukkah standing up in the other person's property and you break into his sukkah. But if you were to steal branches and use those branches for your schach, akol moedim, everyone agrees it's kosher. What's the svar behind this? Rav Nachman explains. The machlokes is as follows. Rabbi Eliezer holds a sukkah needs to be yours. And therefore, in a case where you throw someone out of the sukkah, well, if you hold that karka is nigzalis, karka is stolen, then the sukkah is stolen, and it's not yours, so you're not yoitza. And even if you hold that karka is not stolen, so the sukkah is not stolen, then what is it? It's borrowed, and again it's not yours. Either way, you're not yoitza. The Chacham, however, hold that the sukkah does not need to be yours. It could be borrowed as long as it's not halachically considered stolen. And therefore, being that the Chacham hold karka is not nigzelis, so this sukkah is halachically not considered stolen, it's considered borrowed, and that is fine, and hence they say you're yoitza. And they all agree that if you steal the branches, you are going to be yoitza, because in this case, as Rashi explains, there's a shinui that happens, that it's shinui shame and shinui maisa. You change the name from branches into sukkah into schach, and also you've changed and you've made it part of a building, as will be explained in the Gemara later. And also there's that kones marish, that once you put something into a building, you no longer have to give back the actual item, and you become the new owner, and you just give back the original owner the value of what you stole, and therefore everyone agrees that this is considered yours, and therefore you are yoitza. So even Rabbi Eliezer would agree. Then the Gemara tells us the story of Rab Nachman, how an elderly woman came to him and she was shouting that the Reish Galusa is sitting in a sukkah which does not belong to him, in a stolen sukkah, because he took branches, or people of the Reish Galusa took branches from her without permission and used it for their schach. And Rab Nachman said that she's just a shouter and we do not need to pay attention to her. And we learned the Aruch Laner, who explained that the reason why he was shouting in such a fashion, that he did not address her directly, was perhaps because it was Yom Tov and you're not allowed to paskin on Yom Tov. So he was teaching it to his students in a way that she should be able to hear. Some of the Rashis that we learned on this section. So one question Rashi poses is, in the case where you throw someone out of the sukkah, why are we bringing in the discussion of karka nigzelis, ain't nigzelis? Even if we were to agree that karka is not nigzelis, why does it make a difference? In this case, you're also stealing an actual structure of a sukkah. So, aside from the fact that there's a property you're stealing, you're also stealing a sukkah. So if so, why are we only focusing on the ground aspect of it? And Rashi answers, because the sukkah is attached to the ground, whatever is attached to the ground is considered as if it's the ground itself, and therefore the only relevant factor is whether ground can be stolen or not. Another question Rashi asks is, why in our Gemara do we explain what Rabbi Eliezer says with regards to karka not being nigzelis? Excuse me, it's a typo here. Even to say karka ain't an nigzelis. He holds karka is nigzelis, and if so, why is the Gemara bringing us the other side and saying that even if you hold karka is not nigzelis, he still would not hold your yoitza? Why is it even relevant? When the Gemara explains the Chachamim, we attribute the Chachamim's opinion here to their opinion that we know of elsewhere. So why with Rabbi Eliezer do we not do the same, and we try to explain Rabbi Eliezer on both sides of the coin? And Rashi answers, simply because we don't want it to be mistaken to anyone that perhaps would assume that if we would only explain Rabbi Eliezer with regards to karka nigzelis, then we might think that Rabbi Eliezer would agree with regards to a borrowed one. In other words, we would think it's only because he holds an exelis and therefore it's stolen that he says you're not yoitza. But if it would not be stolen, even though it's borrowed, you wouldn't be. So comes the Gemara and explains that as well. And finally, we learned another question that Rashi asks, which is that earlier in the Gemara and in the previous parak, the Gemara tells us that the Chachamim agree that a stolen sukkah is puzzle. Now, we are now at Rashi saying, well, what case could that even possibly be? If it's the case where you throw the guy, you break into the sukkah, you throw the guy out of the sukkah, Chacham said that's okay, that's your yoitza. And if it's the case that you're stealing branches, again the Chacham said your yoitza. So what is the case that the Chacham said that you're stealing a sukkah and it is puzzle? And Rashi answers, well, it's a case where you're stealing an already built sukkah, and therefore there's no shinui shem or shinui ma'isa, and there's no takanas marish, and there's also it's referring to specifically to a case that it's not attached to the ground. In other words, it's a mobile sukkah, it's a sukkah mobile, it's on a boat or on a wagon, and therefore the sukkah is not mechuber lekarka, so it does not have the din of karka. That's the case that Rashi says. And we looked at Tosfos, and Tosfos quotes that Rashi, that's dealing with the mobile sukkah, and Tosfos says that Rashi, he was doichik to give such an answer. He says, when in fact we can give two other simpler answers. Answer number one is, yes, it's true that the Chacham, we heard them say earlier that a stolen sukkah is puzzle, and over here, though, we only have cases that they're mutter, you're allowed, they're machshir, you are allowed to use it. So how do we explain in which case they say it's puzzle? Tosha says, you're right. There is no case in which it's puzzle. We heard them say it's puzzle. That earlier statement was made with regard to the me'ikar adin midaraisa, the original din, which is that it would be puzzle. But then, in fact, later on, because the Chachamim made a takanas marish, that means that whenever you put schach into a building, when you steal branches and you form it into schach, you do not have to return it. Therefore, as a result of that takana, it then became kosher. So in other words, when the Chacham said it was puzzle, today it would in fact not be puzzle. They were speaking before the takanas marish was made. And in our parak, they're dealing after the takana was made. Second of all, Tosha says we can answer that it's referring to a case of takaf, exactly mirroring the case of our Gemara. You throw the owner out of his sukkah. But in this case, we would not say that it's karka einan exelis, because in such a case we're not looking at the karka at all. It's not relevant. The idea of the karka is not relevant, because it's referring to a case where one person builds a sukkah on another person's property. So Reuven builds a sukkah on Shimon's property, and then Shimon throws Reuven out of the sukkah. So over here, there's no relevance to the ground, the property that the sukkah is on. We don't say that the sukkah is attached to the ground and therefore he's sealing the ground, so that whatever din the ground has, the same thing applies to the sukkah, because being that the property actually belongs to the ganav in the first place, therefore we are only looking at the aspect of the stealing of the walls of the sukkah, and if so, it's a stolen sukkah, and it would be puzzle.